I'm a 33-year-old woman, married to my amazing husband, who's 32. We have a 6-month-old baby girl, who is the light of our lives. Our little family is still adjusting to life with a newborn, but even the chaos feels magical. I've always been the kind of person who values family, especially during the holidays. Traditions like decorating the Christmas tree together or watching my parents fumble with string lights are the moments I cherish most. This year felt even more special because it would be our baby's first holiday season. For as long as I've been with my husband, Christmas has always been spent at his parents' house. His family is big on tradition, and gathering at their place is an unspoken rule. Everyone brings a dish, there's a mountain of presents under the tree, and his mom makes her signature pecan pie. It's loud, messy, and heartwarming in all the right ways. Enter my sister-in-law, who's 27. If I had to describe her in one word, it would be drama. She's the kind of person who thrives on being the center of attention, no matter the cost. Think exaggerated stories, backhanded compliments, and a knack for twisting every situation to make herself the victim. My husband and I have always tried to keep the peace, but she has a way of making everything about her. This year, she decided to drop a bombshell. Out of nowhere, she announced she would be hosting Christmas at her house. It was an immediate curveball. Nobody had discussed it, and her house had never been part of the holiday tradition. Naturally, the in-laws were caught off guard but quickly scrambled to support her. She claimed it was because her partner, who works a demanding job, couldn't travel this year. I could already feel the tension brewing. Her place is a 4-hour drive away, and with a 6-month-old, that's no small task. Anyone who's traveled with a baby knows it's like rolling the dice. You might get a peaceful nap session, or you might endure hours of wailing. On top of that, she lives in a small, cluttered house that isn't remotely baby-friendly. At first, my husband and I thought we could politely decline. Surely she'd understand, right? Wrong. She started making guilt-laden comments in the family group chat, insinuating that anyone who didn't attend didn't care about family. "This is really important to me," she wrote, "and I hope everyone can make an effort to show up. It's not about me, it's about being together." We tried to stay neutral, but her tactics escalated. She began changing the proposed schedule every other day, making it impossible to plan. At one point, she casually mentioned that she wouldn't be child-proofing her kitchen for the baby, so we'd need to bring all of her feeding essentials. I was already dreading the trip, but my husband and I agreed we'd go for a short visit to keep the peace. The passive-aggressive comments didn't stop. Every day, there was something new. She made a big deal about how much effort she was putting into the menu, even though nobody had asked her to host. "I'm doing this for everyone," she said, as if she hadn't bulldozed her way into the role. Then she started comparing our baby's milestones to her dog's achievements. I kid you not, she referred to her dog learning to sit as being on par with our daughter rolling over for the first time. 2 days before Christmas, she dropped the final bombshell. She demanded we arrive earlier than planned, fully aware that it would throw off the baby's nap schedule. My husband, ever the peacemaker, tried reasoning with her, but she wouldn't budge. Her justification? "I'm just trying to make this perfect for everyone, and it's stressful when people don't cooperate." At that point, I'd had enough. I called her out in the group chat, pointing out that she was making things unnecessarily difficult. Her response was to play the victim, claiming I didn't understand how hard she was working. "You have no idea how much pressure I'm under," she said, conveniently ignoring the fact that I was juggling a baby and a long road trip just to accommodate her. The in-laws, bless their hearts, begged us to keep the peace. "She's trying her best," they said, as if that justified her steamrolling everyone else's plans. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go. My husband and I reasoned that it was just one day, and we could leave early if things got too chaotic. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut. What was supposed to be a joyful celebration quickly spiraled into a nightmare, all thanks to my sister-in-law's relentless need for control. If I'd known what was coming, I might have thought twice about agreeing to her plan. But at that moment, I told myself it was worth it for my daughter's first Christmas. Little did I know, that decision would set the stage for one of the most disastrous holidays I've ever experienced. Update 1. The morning started earlier than it should have. We loaded up the car while the baby fussed in her carrier, already tired from the rush of getting ready. My husband handled the last-minute packing while I tried to calm her down, but by the time we hit the road, her wails were relentless. 4 hours stretched into what felt like an eternity as we battled traffic, stopping twice to soothe her. By the time we pulled into my sister-in-law's driveway, everyone was frazzled. Her house looked the same as I remembered, small and cluttered, but now it was decorated to the brim with mismatched Christmas lights. The driveway was packed with cars, and as we struggled to find parking, I realized she had invited more than just family. Inside, it was chaos. People I barely recognized were milling around with drinks in hand. My sister-in-law greeted us with a quick, distracted wave before turning her attention back to a group of her friends. It was clear we were an afterthought. My husband carried the baby's bag while I held our daughter, scanning the room for a place to sit. The noise level was overwhelming, music blared, conversations overlapped, and her dog barked every few minutes. The baby, already cranky from the trip, began to cry. We found a corner to settle in, but my sister-in-law's dog kept running up to sniff the baby, making her cry harder. When I asked if the dog could be kept in another room, my sister-in-law shrugged it off. "She'll get used to it," she said, barely looking up. As the day wore on, things went from bad to worse. The house wasn't just loud, it was overcrowded and completely unfit for a baby. There were no safe places to put her down, no quiet spaces to feed her. My husband and I took turns pacing with her, trying to keep her calm, but the overstimulation was too much. She cried nonstop, her little face red and tear-streaked. Dinner, originally scheduled for 5 p.m., kept getting pushed back. Every time I asked about it, my sister-in-law brushed me off with vague answers. Hours passed, and the baby's routine was thrown out the window. By the time dinner was finally served, it was so late that we had already missed her bedtime. What made it worse was how oblivious everyone seemed. My in-laws were too busy complimenting my sister-in-law's hosting skills to notice our distress. My husband tried to advocate for us, suggesting we eat quickly and leave early, but it fell on deaf ears. Throughout the evening, my sister-in-law kept up her passive-aggressive comments. At one point, she loudly remarked to her friends that some people didn't understand the effort it takes to host. She even joked about how we didn't seem festive, pointing out that I hadn't worn a Christmas sweater. When it came time for gift opening, I was relieved, thinking we'd finally have a moment to sit and enjoy something. But my sister-in-law announced she'd scheduled it for right when the baby was napping, saying it was easier for everyone that way. It wasn't easier for us, though. We ended up sitting out entirely. And then there was the gift she gave our daughter. It was a dog toy, a cheap squeaky bone, the kind you'd pick up at a dollar store. My husband and I exchanged a glance, both too stunned to say anything. "It's for when she gets older," my sister-in-law said with a laugh, as if it were some kind of joke. That was the breaking point. I stepped into the guest bathroom and cried, holding my daughter close. Her first Christmas, the one I'd envisioned as magical and full of memories, felt completely ruined. My husband found me a few minutes later, and without saying much, we both silently agreed it was time to go. When we told my sister-in-law we were leaving, she immediately turned it into a spectacle. She raised her voice, accusing us of being ungrateful and ruining her holiday. The room fell silent as she ranted about how much work she'd put into the day, how we were overreacting, and how this was why she didn't like hosting family events. We didn't argue. My husband calmly said we needed to get our baby home, and we walked out. The in-laws looked torn, but nobody stopped us. The cold goodbye stung, but not as much as the realization that they'd chosen to ignore how miserable the day had been for us. By the time we got home, it was past midnight. The baby was finally asleep, but my husband and I sat in silence for a long time. We had missed everything: her first Christmas morning, the chance to start traditions of our own. That night, as I replayed the events in my head, one thing became clear: this couldn't happen again. My sister-in-law's need for control had overshadowed what should have been a joyful holiday. I didn't know exactly how we'd handle her moving forward, but I knew this was the start of something bigger. I wasn't going to let her ruin another holiday, or any other moment, for my family. Update 2. After the disastrous Christmas, the silence from my sister-in-law was deafening and deliberate. She didn't reach out, didn't check in, and didn't acknowledge how poorly things had gone. Instead, she turned to social media. By the next morning, her posts began popping up. She shared vague, emotional messages about how people don't appreciate the effort you put in and family can be the most hurtful. She added selfies with captions like, "Still smiling through it all," accompanied by a sad face emoji. At first, I ignored it, but when mutual family members started commenting with things like, "You did your best," and "Don't let them bring you down," it was clear her narrative was working. My sister-in-law was painting herself as the victim, and judging by the responses, people were buying it. Soon after, my husband and I started getting calls from his parents. They didn't outright blame us, but the tone was unmistakable. They wanted to know why we couldn't have stayed a little longer, and why we let things escalate. My sister-in-law had twisted the story so well that by the time it reached the in-laws, it sounded like we'd stormed out over nothing. The family chat wasn't much better. My sister-in-law wasn't posting directly but had clearly influenced others. Comments like, "It's hard to host, especially with uncooperative guests," started popping up. It was clear she was orchestrating a smear campaign without having to say much herself. While my husband tried to reason with his parents, I decided it was time to fight back. Her pattern of behavior had gone unchecked for too long, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation any further. I started combing through messages she'd sent in the weeks leading up to Christmas. There were plenty of examples of her shifting schedules, passive-aggressive remarks, and guilt-tripping. Then, I saved screenshots of her social media posts. When I showed my husband, he hesitated. He wasn't thrilled about escalating the situation, but even he admitted she needed to face some consequences. We agreed to take a measured approach. I crafted a message for the family group chat, detailing everything that had happened. I laid it all out: the constant schedule changes, her dismissal of our baby's needs, and the cheap gift that felt more like an insult than a thoughtful gesture. I attached the screenshots, making it impossible for anyone to deny the facts. The chat went silent for an hour. Then, the responses started trickling in. A few relatives thanked us for speaking up, admitting they'd noticed similar behavior from my sister-in-law in the past. Others seemed shocked, realizing they'd only ever heard her side of the story. Of course, my sister-in-law wasn't happy. She exploded in the chat, accusing us of ruining her reputation and taking things out of context. She claimed the screenshots were misunderstandings and that we were targeting her out of jealousy. The meltdown was so dramatic that even her usual defenders went quiet. Things came to a head when her partner reached out to my husband privately. He apologized for her behavior, explaining that she'd been under a lot of stress lately. He didn't defend her actions, but admitted he'd been struggling to handle her mood swings and manipulations. It was the first time anyone close to her had acknowledged the problem, and it felt like validation. In the meantime, my husband and I decided to go no contact with her for the time being. We focused on our daughter and kept our interactions with the rest of the family minimal. The in-laws tried to mediate, but their refusal to take a firm stance only made things worse. They wanted us to let it go for the sake of peace, but we were done sacrificing our well-being to appease her. As the weeks went on, my sister-in-law's situation seemed to unravel further. She'd overspent on the holiday party, and when the bills came due, she started asking the in-laws for financial help. This didn't sit well with some of the relatives who'd seen our evidence. They began questioning why she needed help if she'd been so on top of things as she claimed. Her frustration boiled over into more social media posts, where she vaguely blamed certain people for turning the family against her. But the more she lashed out, the clearer it became to everyone that her manipulations were catching up with her. Eventually, my husband and I set a firm boundary: we wouldn't attend any family events hosted by her. It was non-negotiable. The in-laws weren't thrilled, but had no choice but to accept it. The final blow came when her partner, fed up with her antics, gave her an ultimatum. From what we heard through the grapevine, he told her to either take responsibility for her actions or risk losing their relationship. Whether she would actually change was another matter entirely, but it was clear her grip on the family dynamic was slipping. For the first time in years, my husband and I felt like we had control over the situation. No more bending to her whims, no more tolerating her drama. And as we turned our attention back to our little family, we knew one thing for sure. The days of letting her dominate every holiday, event, and conversation were over. Update 3. After going no contact with my sister-in-law, things slowly started to shift within the family. At first, there was tension. The in-laws kept trying to act as mediators, suggesting family dinners or neutral meetups, but my husband and I held our ground. We made it clear we wouldn't participate in any event where she was the host or where her behavior would be swept under the rug. Instead, we started building closer relationships with the rest of the family. We reached out to cousins, uncles, and aunts, people we hadn't seen much during the drama. We invited them over for casual get-togethers and lunches. These weren't grand events, just simple moments where we could connect without any tension. Slowly but surely, people began to see us in a new light. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law's financial irresponsibility was starting to catch up with her. Word got out that she'd borrowed money from the in-laws to cover the costs of her disastrous Christmas party. What she didn't count on was my mother-in-law casually mentioning it to another relative, who then let it slip to the family at large. It didn't take long for people to piece together that her grand hosting gesture had been funded by others. The kicker came when someone discovered she hadn't even used all the money for the party. She'd splurged on non-essentials, including a designer purse she flaunted on Instagram just days after Christmas. This revelation spread quickly, and her excuses only made her look worse. With her credibility crumbling, I decided it was time to take control of the narrative. We planned a small celebration for our baby's upcoming milestone, her first steps, and invited family members who'd supported us. My sister-in-law wasn't on the list. It wasn't a loud or dramatic exclusion, it was simply clear that her behavior had consequences. The event went off without a hitch. Family members came, bringing thoughtful gifts and spending time doting on our daughter. My husband and I made sure to host in a way that felt welcoming and relaxed, a stark contrast to my sister-in-law's over-the-top chaos. Photos from the day were shared in the family group chat, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like things were shifting in our favor. Not surprisingly, my sister-in-law caught wind of the event and wasn't happy. She tried to host her own gathering shortly after, sending out an elaborate invitation to everyone. But when the day came, almost no one showed up. Aside from her partner and one or two friends, her house was eerily quiet. This seemed to mark the beginning of her desperation. She started reaching out to family members individually, trying to gain sympathy. But the more she talked, the more people began to see through her manipulations. Her partner, to his credit, finally admitted to a few relatives that she'd caused most of the holiday drama. This only deepened her isolation, as even her staunchest defenders were running out of excuses for her behavior. Eventually, the in-laws couldn't ignore the reality anymore. My mother-in-law approached us during one of our visits and for the first time apologized. She admitted they'd been too quick to take my sister-in-law aside and regretted not standing up for us during Christmas. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a step in the right direction. Of course, my sister-in-law wasn't ready to give up. She tried one last-ditch effort to stir up drama, posting vague messages about being betrayed by family and how jealousy ruins relationships. But by then, most of the family had tuned her out. Her posts got little engagement, and attempts to provoke a response were ignored. The final vindication came at our daughter's first birthday party. It was the biggest event we'd hosted yet, with nearly the entire family showing up. Everyone pitched in, from helping set up decorations to bringing food. The atmosphere was lighthearted and fun, and our baby basked in all the love and attention. My sister-in-law wasn't invited, and her absence spoke volumes. There were no dramatic scenes, no passive-aggressive remarks, just a joyful celebration surrounded by people who genuinely cared. As the year progressed, the family dynamic improved noticeably. Without my sister-in-law's constant drama, gatherings became less stressful and more enjoyable. People started looking forward to events again, instead of dreading the inevitable tension. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law seemed to retreat into herself. Her social media posts grew less frequent, and when she did pop up, it was clear she wasn't doing well. Her relationship with her partner was on shaky ground, and she'd alienated most of her friends. Looking back, I felt a sense of relief. Standing up to her hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. By refusing to let her behavior slide, we'd reclaimed our place in the family and ensured our daughter would grow up in a healthier environment. Now, as we start planning our own traditions, I can't help but feel grateful. The holidays are no longer something to dread, and the family feels stronger without her toxic influence. My sister-in-law may still be bitter, but her downfall was entirely of her own making. And for the first time, I feel like we're finally free to enjoy the moments that matter most. Update 4. Summer rolled around, and with it came an unexpected invitation. My sister-in-law announced she was hosting a family barbecue at her house and explicitly included us in the invite. This came out of nowhere, considering we hadn't spoken since the Christmas fallout. The message was overly friendly, with phrases like starting fresh and leaving the past behind. My husband and I immediately sensed something was off. This wasn't her style. She thrived on chaos, not reconciliation. We weren't the only ones skeptical. Other relatives privately reached out, wondering if we planned to attend. When my in-laws got wind of our hesitation, they leaned on us, saying it was a chance to bring the family back together. Against our better judgment, and mostly to avoid more drama, we reluctantly agreed to go. The day of the barbecue was hot and humid, and as we arrived, it was clear my sister-in-law had gone all out. There were balloons, a giant grill fired up, and a table packed with snacks and drinks. She greeted us at the door with an over-the-top smile, her tone syrupy sweet. It felt forced. She made a show of welcoming everyone, offering drinks and plates of food, but it was clear her energy was directed toward managing appearances rather than connecting with anyone. Within minutes, the atmosphere turned awkward. My sister-in-law's attempts to play the gracious host came across as unnatural, and her exaggerated compliments only added to the tension. As people settled into small groups, she zeroed in on my husband and me, making passive-aggressive comments disguised as jokes. She brought up our baby's milestones, comparing them to things her dog could do, as if to belittle our parenting. Her needling didn't stop there. During a conversation about summer plans, she casually mentioned how some people hold grudges for too long, clearly targeting us. She tried to laugh it off, but the room grew noticeably quieter. The breaking point came when she gathered everyone near the grill for a family toast. She started off talking about unity and moving forward, but then turned it into a public jab at us. She painted herself as the bigger person, claiming she was the one trying to mend fences while others refused to let go of the past. That was it. My husband and I had stayed quiet long enough. Calmly but firmly, I listed the reasons for the current rift: her manipulative tactics, the ruined Christmas, the financial lies, and the smear campaign that followed. I spoke directly but without raising my voice, making it clear that this wasn't about holding grudges but about setting boundaries. To my surprise, other family members began chiming in. One cousin mentioned how she'd felt guilt-tripped into attending past events. Another aunt brought up how my sister-in-law had borrowed money and never repaid it. One by one, people started voicing their frustrations, and it became clear that this wasn't just about us. My sister-in-law's behavior had been affecting everyone, and now the cracks in her facade were fully exposed. The moment she realized she'd lost control, her expression shifted. She tried to deflect, saying we were all ganging up on her, but it didn't work. The energy in the room had shifted, and people weren't buying into her victim narrative anymore. She stormed off to her house, slamming the door behind her. The barbecue fizzled out shortly after that. People left in small groups, muttering about how uncomfortable the whole thing had been. My husband and I stayed just long enough to pack up the baby's things, then made a quiet exit. A few days later, we got a surprising call from her partner. He admitted she'd been blaming him for her recent struggles, saying he wasn't supportive enough. He sounded exhausted, clearly at the end of his rope. He mentioned confronting her about her manipulative behavior and gave her an ultimatum: either take accountability or risk losing their relationship. At the same time, the in-laws were starting to reassess their stance. My mother-in-law stopped bringing up my sister-in-law's side of things and instead began focusing on repairing her relationship with us. My father-in-law even reached out to apologize, acknowledging they'd been too lenient in the past. Out of the blue, my sister-in-law sent a vague apology text. It was short and lacked any real acknowledgement of her actions. We chose not to respond. It felt like a half-hearted attempt to save face rather than a genuine effort to make amends. From that point on, my husband and I drew a firm line. We wouldn't attend any event she hosted, wouldn't engage in her drama, and wouldn't let her antics affect our little family anymore. As summer turned to fall, the family dynamic began to stabilize. My sister-in-law grew quieter on social media, her posts less frequent and more subdued. Her influence in the family continued to dwindle, and without her constant interference, gatherings became peaceful and enjoyable again. We still don't know if she'll ever truly change, but for now we're focused on the happiness of our family. The barbecue may have been her last big attempt at control, but it only solidified what we already knew: her behavior no longer held power over us. Update 5. The cracks in my sister-in-law's life finally gave way a few weeks after the summer barbecue. Her partner, who had been remarkably patient despite everything, broke up with her. From what we heard through family channels, he told her he couldn't deal with her manipulative behavior anymore. He wanted a partner who could take responsibility for their actions, and that clearly wasn't her. The breakup hit her hard, and her life spiraled quickly. She started making reckless decisions, calling out of work frequently, posting wild photos on social media, and burning bridges with her closest friends. Eventually, she lost her job, which added to her downward spiral. Those who tried to help her ended up on the receiving end of her anger. My in-laws, still holding on to the hope that they could fix things, stepped in to offer support. They helped her financially and tried to have heart-to-heart conversations about her behavior, but every attempt ended in her lashing out. She accused them of favoring me and my husband, blaming her struggles on the family taking our side. Thanksgiving rolled around, and for the first time in years, the holiday felt peaceful. With my sister-in-law sidelined, my husband and I enjoyed a relaxed dinner with the in-laws. The table was filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of warmth that had been missing during her reign of drama. Even the in-laws seemed lighter, relieved to celebrate without walking on eggshells. My sister-in-law was noticeably absent. She had claimed she wasn't feeling well, but everyone knew she was avoiding the family. Her absence wasn't even a topic of conversation. It was like a collective agreement to not let her overshadow the day. As Christmas approached, my husband and I decided to host. It was the first time we'd taken on such a big role, but we were determined to make it special for our daughter, who was now walking and babbling nonstop. We decorated the house, planned a simple yet delicious menu, and invited the whole family. Everyone accepted, except my sister-in-law. The day was everything I'd hoped for. Our daughter squealed with delight as she tore into her presents, surrounded by doting grandparents, aunts, and uncles. The house was filled with the kind of joy that makes you forget all the stress of planning. At one point, my mother-in-law pulled me aside. She apologized, genuinely this time, for enabling my sister-in-law's behavior in the past. She admitted they had been too quick to excuse her actions and had unintentionally contributed to the family's turmoil. It felt like closure, a long overdue acknowledgement of everything we'd endured. My sister-in-law, of course, couldn't let the holiday pass without making her presence known. She posted a cryptic update on social media about being abandoned by fake family. For the first time, no one in the family commented or liked her post. The silence was deafening and spoke volumes about how much things had changed. A few days after Christmas, she sent a gift for our daughter through the in-laws. It was a small stuffed animal with a card that read, Hope she likes it. There was no apology or attempt to reconcile, just a gesture that felt more like an obligation than anything heartfelt. My husband and I chose not to respond. If she ever wanted to repair the relationship, it would take more than a token effort. Over the next few months, the family dynamic continued to improve. Without my sister-in-law's influence, gatherings became enjoyable again. People showed up eager to connect, not bracing themselves for drama. My husband and I found ourselves closer to his relatives than ever before, and even the in-laws seemed to have a newfound appreciation for peace. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law faded further into the background. Her social media posts became sporadic and lacked the usual flair. When she did pop up, it was clear she was isolated, struggling to rebuild her life but unwilling to acknowledge her role in the fallout. As the year came to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. Standing up to her had been hard, but it was worth it. The family was stronger, our daughter was surrounded by love, and we had finally established healthy boundaries. We also solidified our own traditions. From decorating cookies to watching holiday movies in matching pajamas, we created memories that I knew our daughter would cherish for years to come. My sister-in-law may still be bitter, but her downfall was entirely of her own making. She had pushed too far, for too long, and the consequences were inevitable. For us, it marked the end of a toxic chapter and the beginning of something better, a life focused on joy, connection, and the people who truly matter. With her out of the picture, the holidays felt like they were meant to, a time to celebrate, not endure. And for that, I couldn't be more grateful.